Get started. I want to welcome everybody who's joining us from all over the country because I see lots of different names, some that I recognize, and I know from coast to coast we have people joining us. I want to welcome you to the next webinar in the Remote Strong series, Setting Your Battle Rhythm. Today we're going to have Laura Renner, from the founder of Freedom Makers Virtual Assistant Services, and Sarah Skowronski, Principal Consultant of EOS HR Consulting. I'm going to hand it over to them in just a minute, but I just wanted to go over some admin items for everybody. We are going to have Q&A at the end, so please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and post your questions. I will kind of be going through them during the webinar, and then I'll pop back in and go and moderate the Q&A session. So, and if you have any questions that come up, please don't hesitate to use the chat and ask me any questions or bring anything up. Before the Q&A, Laura and Sarah are going to have offerings from each of their companies for you that are pretty cool, so you'll want to hear those. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you ladies, and I'm going to pop out for a little bit.
Thanks, Jenny. All right, hi everyone, good to see you. And well, I guess I can't see you, but thanks for being here. Just a little bit about me. I'm a veteran and I founded Freedom Makers 5 years ago on April 1st. We just had our 5th anniversary, and we kind of, did a little minor sort of internal celebration since everything going on with COVID, but we'll probably do a more announcement, if you will, later in the next few weeks. And so, yeah, so I started Freedom Makers about 5 years ago. And since then, we've been remote from the beginning. Freedom Makers, we pair military spouses with small businesses to provide support from home. And so because of that, our business is completely remote. And we've spent the last 5 years just figuring out, how do you run a remote business and how do you support people from a distance? And what are the best practices for doing that? And so that's where part of what I'm sharing through these through this Remote Strong series. So Sarah.
And hello everyone, my name is Sarah Skowronski. I'm the Principal Consultant at EOS Human Resources Consulting. I worked in HR in small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses for 15 years before starting EOS. And now we focus, for the past 6 years, we've focused really on helping small businesses manage their HR, develop their HR processes, and make sure that they're in compliance and that they're setting up the structure so that they can continue to grow. And we allow our clients to focus on what they do best, so we will help them manage the employee side of the business. And so today we're focusing on rules of engagement, and I'm sorry, I'm going to turn it over to Laura because she's going to talk now.
So part of our Remote Strong series is about creating and managing a remote workforce. And so our first webinar, if you guys were there for that, we kind of did a broad overview of what are things to consider and things to do in order to create and manage a strong remote workforce. And with that, we thought, okay, well, with the series, we'll go into some of our points more, do like a deep dive into some of those points. So we thought we'd start with a battle rhythm, also known as drum beat, and just sort of what does that mean, like how your team kind of works in conjunction with each other, that cadence that happens through your daily operations and even future operations with your team. So with that, with thinking about battle rhythm, we came up with we decided the best way to present that is these three aspects of battle rhythm. And of course, we decided to keep it with the military theme since I discovered battle rhythm as a military phrase. Not everyone knows what that is. So the first one is rules of engagement. The second one is know the mission. And the third is after action. So we'll go into more detail, but we'll start with the first one, which is rules of engagement, which really is about setting the culture of your team, of how they're going to engage with each other, how you're going to engage with your clients, things like that. So we'll go into that in more detail.
So the rules of engagement is all about communication, where to communicate, when to communicate, and how to communicate, and setting each of those up. So when you talk about where to communicate, you're really looking at in what aspects and what avenues are you communicating with each other, and when is the appropriate time to do that. So it could be via text, or it could be via Slack or Microsoft Teams, or via email, but making sure that that's defined for your employees so that they know where they need to put that information so that it can be found by others.
Right. And that goes to that rules of engagement, right? When you think about working in an office, you don't necessarily need to define that, because especially if you can just yell it across the room, or maybe not yell, but you can talk to each other across the room. And so it's less about where do you communicate. But when you're remote, you have to think about that and annotate that in your rules of engagement. So, you know, for client stuff, we use this platform. For urgent stuff, we use this platform, right? So like at Freedom Makers, we discuss clients and projects in Asana. For urgent things, we do in tasks, and email is mostly just with our clients, we'll communicate through email. And how about you at EOS, Sarah?
So we have, similar to you, we use Asana, but really all of our information is coming in from our clients via email. So we use a CRM that sits on top of our email called Streak, and we manage each of those communications to make sure that we're following up on that. If it's something bigger, like a bigger project, or even kind of a mini project of onboarding a new employee where there's set steps, we'll use Asana for that. And if it's just asking a quick question, we use Microsoft Teams, and we did use text messaging for that. But as we grew and as our client base grew, that became cumbersome and hard to track who we were talking about. So having a tool like Slack or Teams where we can compartmentalize by the client, we are able to track the conversations and make sure that we're following up in an expedient manner.
I think that's a great point about where to communicate, right? Because when you're doing it on text, then you're having multiple conversations going at once, and they're not organized. And that's kind of that chaos that is not a battle rhythm, right? And so when you have the rules of engagement about where to communicate, that reduces that chaos. And that's what creates your battle rhythm.
Right.
And related to that then is when to communicate. For example, having set meeting times, and we always recommend that to our clients, like have a standing meeting with your Freedom Maker, same time every week, and it's rarely rescheduled. It doesn't need to be scheduled. It just stands there. It's just existing. Mm-hmm. And then also level of urgency. So at what point do you need to call or text or do something else? So that's part of that when to communicate, is having that clear as well.
Right. And whether it's a one-on-one or a stand-up check-in, so we have a daily check-in meeting where we're going over client issues and making sure that we understand what's happening, and cross-training and cross-communication of, you know, if somebody has a specialty in something that they can help out with, we have that during that time. We also do a weekly call where we are doing more training and more bigger picture and business development type of things. But like you, we also have weekly calls with our outsourced clients. So if we're engaged with a client on a regular basis, we're also creating these rules of engagement with our clients so that that communication continues on, and we continue to build that.
Wonderful. And finally, how to communicate. And that's really around sort of the language that you tolerate, or I guess that's a way to say it. But also how you want your team to engage with each other. For example, the process for decision making, but also what kind of boundaries you're willing to set. And so Sarah and I were joking about this the other day, where I was saying it's almost like having a safe word, where it's sort of, it can be where you might have it where your team can have a phrase that they use that means something that everyone understands what that means. And so an example is, I was reading this blog where these two co-founders they were chatting all day, every day via text or WhatsApp or whatnot. But sometimes they needed quiet time to be able to focus on whatever they were working on. And so it wasn't that they didn't want to talk to the other person or they were annoyed by the other person. It was they just needed to focus. And somehow they came up with this phrase called tree time. They don't remember where that came from, but that became their phrase for, look, it's not you, I just need to focus. And so then it wasn't like offensive or hurtful to the other person. It'd be like, hey, look, I just need a couple hours, I need some tree time. And the other person knew what that meant and they weren't hurt by that. And so I started calling it a safe word, and Sarah in her HR wisdom called it boundaries.
Yes, and whether you have a word that's triggering the boundaries, or you're doing it by a calendar or some other way of communicating, creating those boundaries, creating that space where people can say, I need to focus, or I'm available to talk to people, or I'm working on a special project during this time. I actually have on Wednesdays, I have a CEO day. That is my day that I am supposed to be focusing on the business and focusing on things that need to be done for the business. And so those are times that I'm not generally scheduling things, other meetings, but to hold that time, and my staff know that, okay, if I need to ask for this time, I need to ask for it rather than just assuming that Sarah's available.
And related to that too is maybe time, right? Like if it's after hours, especially with people working remotely, work hours becomes more fluid. And so also setting your rules of engagement for when or expected response time based on time of day. Or do you want to talk more about that, Sarah?
Yeah, first of all, you want to be careful that you're respecting people's boundaries in terms of not, if you have an hourly employee or you have somebody who's working, that you're not extending past 8 hours a day or something that's out of norm. But also remember that just because people can work doesn't mean that they should be working. It's important to have some sort of balance and make sure that people are stepping away, and to respect that this isn't necessarily going to be a 8 to 5 position, especially right now, because there's so many more things coming into our home space. There's more distractions that employees might not be able to sit in a seat from 8 to 5. They might need to go and take care of their child and help them get started on a class project. Or there might be a distraction because everybody's on the internet, and so they're not able to actually get work done right now. So having some flexibility around that. And again, it's making sure that that's communicated, that you understand that, and that they know when they're going to be available, so that you know when they're going to be available, and then how they're communicating is done appropriately.
Fantastic. Yes. So that's the key thing too, I think, is when you're thinking about and trying, you probably already have some sort of battle rhythm, and maybe it's chaotic and you want to get it less chaotic or less frenetic. And so you got to take time to stop and think about, what do you want your battle rhythm to be? And this is step one. Stop and think about, what are your rules of engagement? Where should people communicate about certain things? When should that be communicated? And how do you want your team to talk with each other as well as engage with your clients?
And also to that point, I think it's important to realize that it's going to change over time. So as I said, we started with text messaging because there was only 2 or 3 people on the team, and we only had a certain number of clients that we were dealing with. But as our team is growing and as our client base is growing, we had to switch to a program which is called Microsoft Teams. And even with that, we're continuing to grow. This morning I had our morning check-in call, and we actually pulled that up and shared that screen and talked about how we could meet on video using that. And so we're continuing to learn and to add on to what these rules of engagement are, and adding on to that battle rhythm. It's not a one and done. You have to continue to finesse it and continue to make it better. I'm sorry, working from home, you have dogs. And so you just want to make sure that you are not locking yourself in and saying this is now written in stone, but that rather this is where we're starting from, and let's look at how we can continue to improve that.
Exactly. Like I think we went from text to Slack And then once we got on Asana, we didn't really need Slack anymore. And it was one of those team calls where we're like, why are we still using this? And so then there was like one thing we were using it for. We shifted that around, and then we let go of Slack. And so what works for now, I always say I'm a fan of the 80% solution, right? If it gets 80% of it done now, do it, and then figure out how to make it to 100% later.
Right.
All right.
All right.
So the second part, oh, go ahead.
No, carry on.
The second part is knowing the mission, right? So now you know how you're going to engage with each other. Now you got to know what you're going to do. And as we mentioned in our last webinar, the major difference between working a remote team and an in-person team is the shift from focusing on time to focusing on results. So it's less about how long it takes someone to do something or when they're doing it versus when it's done and how well it's done. And so with that, then it comes to knowing the mission. So part of that is who is responsible. Defining the lanes of responsibility in your company. And you can do it multiple ways. Like at Freedom Makers, we split responsibility by function, like sales, marketing, operations. And Sarah, you split it by level, right?
Right. So we split it by kind of a base level we have administrative, and then our generalist who does a lot of the routine tasks, and then our consultants who dig into deeper kind of bigger problems and issues with our clients.
And so that's critical, is when you have these lanes of responsibility, then it helps people to know what they're supposed to do, right? When you're in person, that, especially as a small business, that's maybe less critical because it's sort of like line of sight, right? Like, okay, John, you take care of this. Jane, you take care of that. And it's a little bit easier to manage, presumably in person. One would argue it's still not efficient, but you're able to do that. However, when everyone's distributed, that's much harder to do. So it's a better way is when you know the mission as far as who is responsible for what, and then they can just go and run with it because they know that falls in their lane. So if something comes from a client, and rather than waiting for you to say, hey, Jane, take care of that, instead, they know this is in my lane, I got it, I'm doing it.
Right. And then the next is to what authority level. And I think, last time we talked about people knowing when they can make decisions and where their authority level, where their power level is. And that's important too, because you want people to be empowered to do things and to continue the task forward and move the mission forward. But you also need to have some control of, you don't want people giving away product or giving away services for free. But if they know that there was a mistake made, or they know that there was some sort of issue, you want them to be able to correct that with the client and make those recommendations.
And those two things are clear as far as, again, knowing the mission, but helps with the battle rhythm, right? Because say, for example, in Sarah's business, say she has a consultant who likes to do her own admin work. So now she's dipping into the lane of the administrative person. And so then it confuses the battle rhythm, it adds confusion, it adds friction, right? And so that's what you're trying to avoid by setting your battle rhythm. So when you're able to provide clarity and transparency to your team about, no, you're a consultant, you do this, the administrative person will take care of this, then that becomes clearer. And it doesn't have to be 100% clear, as I said, 80% is good enough, right? Mm-hmm. Then it helps reduce that friction and improve your battle rhythm. Same with us at Freedom Makers with our different functions. Sometimes our functions overlap. And so we do try and discuss and work on, okay, whose lane should that fall under? But generally, we have a pretty clear idea of who's responsible or what tasks fall under which functions, and therefore who's responsible for them. And the level of authority is fluid, but we try to be clear about that too.
Right. Yeah, I think all of this, we have to remember that 80% rule of like, everything is fluid, small business is fluid, life is fluid right now. And so it's not always, it is not written in stone. None of these are written in stone, but to have the guidance there to start with is really what we're looking for.
And then I just remembered one other thing as well, and that is, well, now I forgot it. No, but going back to the reducing the chaos and the friction, which then increases or improves your battle rhythm, is if you don't have those lanes clear and you're willy-nilly assigning things, then you also run the risk of forgetting to assign something.
Right.
And then something falls through the cracks. So this just helps reduce that friction.
Right. And that leads right into outlining the action steps, making sure that you have a checklist, a task list, an outline of how things are supposed to happen, so that you're not missing things, you're not losing things. Just yesterday, I was listening to a call, and they were talking about a study that was done at Johns Hopkins Hospital by Dr. Peter Provost, and he did this study about how in an ICU that the doctors they knew what they were supposed to do, but there was still infections happening. There was still people dying. And when they implemented a simple 5-item checklist, which were simple things like washing your hands and making sure you were pulling clean tools out, that they reduced the number of deaths and infections dramatically. And so, granted, we're not all saving lives, but having those steps outlined allows us, even the smartest person in the room is going to forget some step along the way if they get distracted, in this time of multitasking, especially when in reality you can't multitask. You can't move from one thing to another without losing some brain focus. And so having those steps outlined is really important, so that we can go through the checklist and make sure we completed everything we needed to complete.
And I heard a great phrase a couple of weeks ago, phrase, and she called it mental RAM. And when you don't have the action steps outlined outside of your brain, you're using mental RAM every time you do something. And that then you're just taking up space, right? So by outlining the action steps, you're able to let someone else step in and take care of it for you. But 2, then you have that checklist, so you're using less mental RAM to do things, even though you think, oh, it's simple, of course I'm going to remember to wash my hands. But then it's surprisingly you don't, because that's why there was an issue, right? And so reducing that use of mental RAM helps with also reducing that friction and just getting more stuff done successfully.
Right. And then the last is keeping to the schedule. And so this is important that you continue to move forward, that you continue to keep on a schedule, whatever that is, whether it's your meeting times or when things are supposed to be completed, you're actually maintaining that schedule. And as a manager or as a business owner, you're setting the example to your employees to make sure that they know that this is our schedule, this is our battle rhythm, and we need to continue to keep to this and mark the things off the checklist and follow up with clients, whatever those steps are, that we are leading by example.
Yes, as a mentor said to me, it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. And so if you're always skipping your standing check-in meetings, you're communicating to your team that those meetings don't matter. Or if you're always rescheduling them, or if you're blowing past the deadlines that you set for your tasks without explaining why, again, then you're telling your team that task deadlines don't matter. And so it's okay to push out a deadline, but say why and make sure there are valid reasons. And if this is happening a lot, then stop and take a minute and think about, okay, why are we not holding to our meetings? Why are we not meeting our task deadlines? And reassess and redefine your rules of engagement so that you will have higher success in meeting those, keeping to that schedule.
Right.
So as with anyone or anything, right, follow through is what leads to success. You can have all these plans, you can put all this in place, but if you're not doing it, if you're not following the plan, then it's a great plan, right? And that's it. And so part of the third aspect of creating a battle rhythm is having an after action process, if you will, because follow through is what's going to get us all to the finish line.
So after action, this includes accountability, which we talked about a little bit with following the schedule. Make sure you're applying the lessons learned, sharing the structure with others, and then having backups for those. So with accountability, you know, as I said, you are holding yourself accountable when you're setting the schedule and keeping to the schedule. But in this term, you're actually holding your team accountable for the things that they have been assigned and for following through on the battle rhythm and following through on the processes that have been set up. Do you want to add anything, Laura?
Well, and just, you know, going back to when you have those lanes of responsibility and levels of authority, you're able to hold people accountable, and they're able to hold you accountable, saying, why did you give that to Jane? That falls under John. And you can have that sort of engagement with each other, saying, wait a second, this is how we agreed to do it. Let's do it the way we agreed to. If it's not working, let's change how we agreed to do it.
Right. Right. And again, going back to looking at if something's not working, does it need to be revised or reviewed? And that goes right into applying lessons learned.
Well, if we can go back to using the example you shared about that Johns Hopkins story, right, that came from pilots. He got that idea from pilots. And back 20 years ago, I think it's all electronic now, but 20 years ago, they had these special clipboards that you could literally Velcro to your leg, because they had checklists for the aircraft inspection before you got on, getting the aircraft started, getting it taxied to take off, once you were in flight, once you're landing, and the post-landing inspection. They had checklists for everything. And they literally, you could Velcro it to your leg. It was the small size, the size of your thigh, so that it sat right there while you were flying. And the thing is pilots use that, right? And even if you're like, oh, this is muscle memory, I know it, you still have it there to check, right? And the article about that Johns Hopkins was saying that there's still something like 30,000 deaths a year due to this infection because people in the OR aren't using the checklist. Right. And part of it is no one disagrees that the items on that checklist shouldn't be done. Wow, that was like a triple negative sentence, right? Like, so everyone agrees that what's on the checklist needs to be done, but they are resisting being held accountable to doing the checklist, right? Like they're resisting that compliance of, you know, someone doesn't feel comfortable saying, hey, we didn't do the checklist. Why aren't we using the checklist? That's not a part of the culture, generally speaking, within the ORs. And so people are resisting using the checklist. And that's a key part of accountability is, are people using it? Are you insisting or setting it up so that they will use it? And what is the accountability if they don't?
Right. And again, it goes back to the fact that, yes, we all know that these things should be done, but when you're in the middle of something, especially right now, you can get so easily distracted that when you go back to it, you don't remember where you were in that list. And if you're just depending on your own memory, then something's going to slip. And having a list and saying, okay, yes, I did this, and mark it off, then you can come back and you can look at the list and say, okay, I'm on to the next thing now.
Right. Reduces mental RAM, reduces friction. I'm all about my cliches.
All right. So applying lessons learned. This is making sure that when there are things that need to be changed, when things are not working in the process that you set up, that you're going back and adjusting that. Don't just keep using the same checklist if it has wrong things on it. You need to go back and correct it and adjust it and review those items once you've completed the action.
Exactly.
Anything else you want to add to that one?
You know, I know we had stuff, and I'm totally blanking right now. But I think you covered it. And a big part of just always willing to go back and reassess and be like, how is this working? How do we make it better? And what can we do to make it better?
Right, right. And then sharing the structure with others. So this is where having templates set up, having things set up so that if somebody is unable to take on their responsibility, somebody else can step in and know what needs to be done. It's not all up here in my head. It's somewhere where somebody else could step in and follow through and complete those tasks. And I know you're working right now on a continuity plan, and that's a huge thing for a small business to have, because there are a lot of things that a business owner just does that nobody else knows how to do.
Right. And I think that goes back to everything we've been saying about knowing the mission and having the rules of engagement. When you're in person, it's institutional knowledge becomes easier to share, and it also becomes easier to create. And that's risky, because then if someone unexpected, like if they fall ill and they can't come in, now you've lost all that institutional knowledge. And so by being able to share the structure and keeping the structure updated reduces the institutional knowledge that then someone else has to learn when they come into a role. And so the more that you have captured, updated, and shared, then the less risk you have of losing institutional knowledge when someone goes offline.
Right, right. And then the last one here is to have backups. So it's important to, while we have everybody in their lane of authority and in where they're supposed to be working, it's also important for other people, especially in a small business, to know how to do those things, so that they can step in and easily take on that checklist and easily step into that role if they need to, even though it may not be their lane of authority.
Exactly. And that's, when you have a big team and you have multiple people in a lane of responsibility, then it's almost like backups are kind of automatic. But when you're small and you may only have one person in each lane, it's kind of nice if someone else knows it enough to be able to at least say, I know where to go to find that in case I need to fill in unexpectedly. So it's just nice to have those backups in that way.
Right. Definitely.
We just want to do things with limited disruption.
Right.
Reduce the friction.
It's all about reducing the friction. So I think that wraps up our the information. So just to go back, we have the for the battle rhythm, you have the
rules of engagement,
knowing your mission, and the after action. So you want to make sure you have your rules in place and how you're communicating. You know what the goal is, what the mission is, what you're working towards, and then following up and continuing to grow and continuing to hold people accountable to these rules that you've set.
And I'll finish with going back to that doctor. One of the things he said was, you need to give time, you need to create space for people to review how things are going and make improvements, right? And so maybe you set aside once a week, a quarter, a month for the team to come together and say, how can we do this better? What's working? Where are the gaps? And let's make those 80% changes so that we can get, or 20% changes so we can get an 80% improvement.
All right. So as Jenny mentioned, we do have some packages that we wanted to offer you. From EOS Human Resources Consulting, we're offering the pandemic policy package. As we discussed last time, there are a number of policies that have come into play now under FFCRA, which is the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. This act is in effect through the end of the year. So even if you have employees who are furloughed right now, when they come back to work, you need to have these policies in place. And it includes an emergency paid sick leave, emergency family medical leave, and then the request forms for these. These leaves are reimbursed 100% by the government. And so you need to make sure you're documenting that correctly and that you're paying that correctly. So this package includes the policies, as well as a work from home policy and a consultation with one of our consultants, one of our HR consultants, to go over what is required in this policy so that you know how to roll it out to your staff. It's a value of $149, and we are offering it for $99. And you can go to go.eoshr.com/COVID if you'd like to purchase that.
And this is all about rules of engagement right here.
This is.
All right, so with us, as I mentioned at the top of this, we have spent the past 5 years really focusing and learning on how to build systems and battle rhythms for remote teams. And so, as I mentioned, you all already have a battle rhythm. It's just how do you reduce the chaos and the friction within it to make it a more efficient rhythm. So with us, we'll review what you currently have. We'll survey your team for what are their roadblocks. And we'll put together a recommendation for you on how to reduce those frictions and chaos. So normally that's $300. We're offering it for $150 using the promo code COVID. You can use the QR code or that link to go ahead and get that scheduled.
All right. So with that, Jenny, would you like to let us know if we have any questions?
I do want to mention that we have our next webinar. It'll be in 2 weeks, and that one is around building a culture of trust. And so be on the lookout for that announcement and registration.
Sure thing. Oh my gosh, I sit here and practice with you guys and learn about this, and I still think I go listen to your webinar, and it's such great information. So thank you, ladies. Really good. And Sarah, we will have you using rules of engagement pretty soon and all this military jargon in your normal day-to-day.
I feel like I'm translating for all of the non-military people out here. This is what it means in the real world.
Exactly. It's a great partnership. So. Okay, so first question is from Diane. And well, first of all, she also says go Air Force. That would be to you, Laura. Okay, so she was talking about, and I think this question popped up in the last section. I know it did, and she's asking about a more trusted delegation. And I think that's when you were talking about sharing, you know, and your backups and everything, you know, you have to have a trusted delegation. Can you guys speak more to that about these backups and lessons learned and sharing everything for your after action?
Well, so when you say trusted delegation, my first thought is one of the things I always say are the 5 levels of delegation. And so level 1 is do exactly what I said, how I said to do it, tell me you did it, things like that. Level 2 is go research it. Based on your research, I'm going to tell you our next step, and then I'll tell you whether or not I want you to do that next step. Level 3 is go do the research, give me a recommendation, and then I will say, yes, go with that or not. Level 4 is do the research, give me a recommendation, do it, tell me you did it. And level 5 is I don't even need to know that you did it, right? So those are the different levels of delegation. And you can, when I first started, I would choose my level of delegation based on the function and how much I wanted to let go of that function personally. Then as we've grown, it's become also about the people involved. And I was speaking with a mentor about, you know, with one of my employees, well, all of you, but in this particular example, one of my employees, I trust her tremendously. She's at level 5, but when we hire a second person, what if that second person I don't trust as much? And he said that's totally fine. You can have different levels of trust with different people, you can have different levels of authority, even with people in the same lane of responsibility. And so there does come a personality aspect of that, but also as far as responsibility aspect is too. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I mean, I think it's just from what I take of the question of Diane's question, and Diane, feel free to chat us back or ask in a different way. But I mean, I think that covers it. I think it's just really important to share, like you guys talked about. I think that's but please, Diane, follow up. Yes, she said yes. So okay. You're good. Okay, perfect. Okay, so Maria asked, would you suggest a team meeting at the beginning and end of a day? Or is that too much? And I think that's really an important question, especially with what we're dealing with right now with the coronavirus?
I think it varies on your type of operation. So at Freedom Makers, we have a team meeting once a week, but we are chatting with each other through our platforms all the time. I know some of our clients have team meetings at the beginning of and end of every week, and their Freedom Maker may join one or both of those depending on what they need, because they tend to talk about what do we need to do this week, what did we accomplish this week, and therefore what needs to be pushed off to next week. So they have their Freedom Maker attend one of those so that the Freedom Maker knows, okay, this is what I need to track for this week. So it really varies based on your operations and how you like to operate. Like Sarah, you have a team meeting every day, every morning, right?
I have a team meeting every morning, except for Mondays when we have we have a team check-in every morning, and then we have a team meeting every Monday. But it also depends on what type of work you're doing and if there's something that needs to be prepared for the next day. So it might be that in the morning you're checking in on what do you need to work on, what do you need help with that day, and at the end of the day it might be, okay, in preparation for tomorrow we need to have these things prepared, especially if there's people maybe who are working later in the day, or if you have kind of split shifts or people doing different things at different times. You may just need to be able to check in at the end of the day to see, okay, what are we rolling over into the next day. So again, it really depends on the type of business you're doing and the type of work and what kind of cadence you need to create for that.
And how you like to operate, right? Because that's another thing too. I've been hearing this phrase, people are zoomed out. They're just kind of already burnt out from Zoom. And so really consider too, does that discussion/decision need to happen over a live discussion? Can it happen in written form through Teams, through Asana, through Slack, whatnot? And so that's something else to consider too. How much of your engagement needs to be live video versus written, and then determining how frequently you need to have your team meetings or check-ins.
Mm-hmm.
And Maria, she did kind of a secondary question to this, and I probably should have combined them, but she's saying, is it beneficial to set up these mini meetings to discuss specific topics versus waiting, till that next operations meeting? I think you guys discussed that, but maybe you could discuss, when you say, Laura, I can speak to this, when you say that you guys talk throughout the day, you are doing that through what platform?
We do it through Asana.
Okay, and Sarah, you keep up with your team through Teams?
Yeah, Teams, yeah.
Okay, so I think you guys answered kind of, operationally, it depends on how you work, but there are ways to keep in touch throughout the day as a team.
Right, and I'll add to, one of the things we do is we have, at Freedom Makers, I have an individual with each function. And in my case, it's one employee each, right? So I have an individual meeting every week with each of my employees, and then we have a team meeting where we all come together. And for each of those, we do have but we have a project within Asana where we can go in and add topics we want to discuss during that meeting. If it can't wait until that meeting, then that's usually they're texting me like, hey, can we talk about this? And I might just call them, or we can just discuss it over text real quick. But if it's something that can wait until the meeting, we just throw it into our weekly agenda and we discuss it during the meeting. Our weekly check-in meeting, we have a standing agenda where we just go over. In a way, it's sort of our water cooler, because, for example, marketing's not going to know what operations is doing because they don't see each other's projects. And it's not that we're holding it from them. It's just that we have so much going on. They don't know that stuff. So it's just a chance for everyone to come together and share in a fluid manner what's happening.
No, that's good. There's a question that came through on chat to the panelists, and it basically deals with those lessons learned, and kind of like, Sarah, you use the word finesse, finessing your communications and what how things are working out for you. How often do you guys suggest you finesse things? I mean, weekly check-in, or to kind of change things up, or just do it quarterly, monthly? Because I mean, a lot of change, one person misses a meeting and they could miss the change. So how often do you recommend that? you examine your procedures?
I think it should. I think it's kind of twofold. One is that when you realize that there's something wrong with a process, you want to address it right away. But part of that then is making sure that you're communicating that and consistently communicating that back. So if you are making a change, to address the person who is missed a meeting, that needs to be communicated in a way that now everybody is aware of that change, however that is being brought about. So again, it goes back to how are you communicating, and part of that is communicating a change. So it might be that you choose to do it on, like I would, off the top of my head, I'd say, kind of gathering up those changes and either on a weekly call or a quarterly call, or having these are the things that we changed. These are the things, this is the most up to date.
Gotcha. No, that's good. Laura, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll add, well, I think at Freedom Makers, what we do is we have a quarterly call. We call it the vision call. And we discuss what we liked about or what we feel we accomplished in that quarter. And then we also discuss what we want to focus on for the next quarter. And so those are usually areas that we see as gaps that we want to address in the next quarter. And we make sure to limit that so we're not overwhelming ourselves with too many things. So we're like, okay, we're going to address these things this quarter. So if something comes up during the quarter, we'll say, okay, let's put that off to next quarter. We'll discuss it in our vision call then. So we do have a standing quarterly call for things like that. But then added to Sarah's point, we do also on the spot. I like to call those pebble in the shoe problems, where they're like not necessarily a big deal, but they're so annoying and they take up your mind because it's not stopping you from walking, right? But it just drives you nuts. And so I always say, well, address the biggest pebble in your shoe. And then when you get relief from that, the next pebble will start to annoy you, and then address that one. And so to Sarah's point, like as those issues come up, as you see those gaps, do the 20% solution that's going to give you the 80% relief. And then periodically, like quarterly or however long, sit down and think, okay, what do we want to address that's bigger than a pebble in our path?
That's great. No, that's good. Okay, so finally, Kristen Washington has some really nice feedback, said this is really good information, and she wants to help promote these webinars. Yes, Kristen, as you know, it answered your first question. We do have more coming up, as Laura's talked about. Laura, you said in 2 weeks, so that would be April 30th?
Yes.
Same time, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern.
Yes.
So, Kristen, hopefully that answers your question, and we do appreciate, you promoting that for us. And we will also have this posted to an email, follow-up email, this webinar that you can share as well. So all of the information is recorded and saved, and you will receive a copy of it as well. And
we'll send the announcement of the next webinar to people who registered for this one, so you don't have to worry about missing that. So.
Yes. So that's great. Lots of great questions, lots of good information. Ladies, do you have anything more to add?
I'll just say thank you for joining us. And I hope it was helpful, and we're here to help as you adjust to having a remote workforce.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate this, and we want to do this just because we feel like it's important information, and so and we're glad that people are able to join us,
especially with all the bombardment of webinars going on. We appreciate you joining us.
Yes, thank you. Oh, and with that, we will see you in 2 weeks. Take care.